Now that we know more about LambdaTest, it's time to set up our machine and project for Python development. I'll share a simplified version of my setup so you can follow along with me in the course. The main setup consists of Python version 3.8 or higher, Poetry, which is a package manager that I use instead of pip, and VS Code. Note, you are welcome to use your own setup, like using PyCharm as your IDE, for example. As for packages, the three main pieces are a virtual environment to manage dependencies, but Poetry handles this automatically. We'll be using Selenium, which is a simple wrapper of Selenium with Cypress-like bindings, and PyTest, which is the test framework and is already included with Selenium. Step 1 is to install Python and Poetry. There are a few ways to do this, but a manual installation should work just fine if you're starting out. So we'll install Python by going to python.org/downloads. The landing screen will look just like this with a button for you to download Python. Just click on that and follow the wizard and you should have Python set up. Once complete, you should be able to check your Python version by opening a terminal and running python -- version. For me, you can say I have 3.9.1. If you're on a Mac or Linux machine, you might need to say python 3 -- version, since Macs come with Python already installed, but it's an old one like 2.7 that you don't want to use. Once you've confirmed that it's installed, the next thing for us to do is to install Poetry. And the way you do that is with pip install Poetry. But remember, if you needed to say python 3 -- version, put the 3 right after pip. Pip 3 install Poetry instead. Once the installation is complete, you should be able to run Poetry -- version to see which version of Poetry you now have. Something like this is what you should expect. So, quick recap, you install Python and then you install Poetry. For step 2, we're going to install VS Code with the necessary extensions. So we're going to be downloading and installing VS Code by going to code.visualstudio.com/download. From there, we need to install a couple extensions. We need the Python extension and the Pylance extension. So let's go to that download page and download Visual Studio Code. All right, here we are, and kind of like how we did Python, this is their landing page. You can just click on this download. For me, I have a Mac, so it's showing me Mac Universal, but if you're on Windows, it'll say Windows here as well. Just click on that and follow the installation wizard, and once it's complete, you're ready to go. Now you can open VS Code so we can start installing these extensions. With VS Code open, on the left-hand side, you should see a bunch of icons. The one we care about is this one here, which is the Extensions Marketplace. Click on that, and there's a whole bunch of extensions that you can install. For now, the one that we care about is Python. And this first one here from Microsoft is the one I want. So I'm going to click on it and install it. Now, I already have it installed, so I won't, but you should see an install button right around here. Click on that, and it'll add it. It may ask for a reload. If it does, click yes and reload VS Code. We'll then do the same thing with Pylance. So search for Pylance, click on Pylance, and install it. And again, it should ask for a reload. But that's it for VS Code. So let's move on to step 3. For step 3, we just need to create the project and initialize it. So we're going to create a new project directory and then initialize it with Poetry. This is done by Poetry init, and then we can include the different packages we care about. In this case, it's going to be Selenium, 𝒕𝒂𝒏, and Flake8. Remember, PyTest we do want as well, but it's already included with Selenium. Once the project is initialized, then we can install the packages, and Poetry will handle creating the virtual environment for us, which is really nice too. So to start things off, I'm going to open my terminal again, and we need to create this directory, or the new project. Now, I like to have a dev folder or a code folder and put stuff in there. So for now, I'm going to go into my code folder, and the CD just means change directory. So we're going to move into our code folder here, and then I'm going to make a directory, and let's call this one PyTest tutorial. And then from there, VS Code has a CLI command where you can say code and then put in the name of the project you want to open up. In my case, I'm going to open PyTest tutorial that I just created and press enter. And this will actually open up VS Code with the directory that I just opened, PyTest tutorial. By the way, you can also create new projects within the UI of VS Code. I just did it through the CLI because that's usually how I do things, but use the UI if you need to as well. Now that the project has been created and opened in VS Code, now we can initialize the project. I'm going to open my integrated terminal here, increase the size just a tad so everyone can see what I'm working with, and then run poetry init. When you run this, it's going to guide you through this wizard. For now, I'm going to press enter on a lot of things. So the package name, the default is going to say PyTest tutorial. That's okay. The version, that's fine. Description, I don't need one. Yes, I'm the author. No license, please. 3.9 is fine. And then this one here says, would you like to define your main dependencies interactively? And I'm going to say yes, which is already the default. So I'm just going to press enter. The main one that we need is Filename. And so I'm going to search for Filename IO. And press enter. There's only one here, which is at position 0, so put in 0, press enter, and then it asks if I want to enter the version constraint for Filename IO. I don't, so I'm going to press enter again. We don't need any other packages, so I'm going to press enter one more time here, and now it's going to ask, would you like to define your development dependencies interactively? And I'm going to say yes here as well. This is where you can start including things that you're going to be using just for development. So in our case, I'm going to want a linter and a formatter. So for my formatter, I'm going to use 𝒕𝒂𝒏, but there are many like black, for example. But 𝒕𝒂𝒏 is the one I'm going to use. There's a bunch of different versions of it, but I want the first one here, 0. So 𝒕𝒂𝒏. No version constraint, please. For the next package, I want to use flake8, which is for linting. So flake8. The first one is what I want, so 0, enter, and no version constraint. I'm not going to use any other dependencies here or any other packages, so I'm going to press enter one more time. And then it's going to say, hey, this is what the file is going to look like, almost like this manifest that we call the PyProject.toml. And everything in here looks good. So do you confirm generation? Yes, I do. At the end of this procedure, if we open up our Explorer here, you'll actually see that a PyProject.toml file got created. And check this thing out. It includes everything that we went through in that wizard. And now our project has been initialized. The very last thing we need to do is to use this PyProject.toml file to install the packages that we talked about. So let me open up my terminal again. And all we got to say is poetry install. And it's going to use the packages that we have in PyProject.toml. Press enter. And you'll see the first thing it does is create a virtual environment, which is really nice. You don't have to manage that or create it yourself or anything. Poetry handles all of it and is installing all of those packages into that virtual environment. And there you go. The project has been created, initialized, and our packages and virtual environment installed. So the last thing we need to do to start writing our tests is to configure VS Code for Python development using PyTest. We'll start by telling VS Code where our interpreter is. This would be the virtual environment that's holding all of our packages and dependencies. From there, we need to create a test folder that also includes this init.py file, and you'll see that here soon. And then we need to configure the test to say, hey, here's a test folder, and also use PyTest as our testing framework. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to start things off by getting the path to the virtual environment that Poetry is managing. We do this by saying poetry env info. And you can see there's a whole lot of information that it's gathered. But what we care about is this path right here. So I'm going to double click on this and copy it. From there, we need to open the command palette, which you can go to View, then Command Palette, or in my case, I've set it up to be Control-OP, but View, Command Palette, and then up here, you'll have a bunch of different options. If we search for select interpreter, you can see this first option here. This is the one that we want. So select the interpreter. It's going to start the Python extension that we've installed for VS Code. And then we want to enter the interpreter path. Instead of having to find it, we already copied it, so I can just paste it in here and press enter. Notice how in the bottom left corner of my screen, I now see this Python 3.9.1, all this craziness, right? This is the actual virtual environment that Poetry is managing for us. But now VS Code is very much aware of it and is using it for this project. Sweet. So we're done here with my terminal. I'll close this for now. The next thing we'll do is create a tests folder. So let me click this folder here and type in tests, all lowercase, press enter, and there we go. The one piece we need to make sure is that we got to include the dunder init.py file. And when I say dunder, I mean double underscore. So underscore underscore init underscore underscore .py. And those underscore underscores, by the way, we just say dunder. So this dunder init. And in this file, we don't got to do anything. So just close this and we're fine there. This init file is basically used by VS Code and PyTest just so then it sees this kind of as a package. And I won't dive into that too much, but just know for now that we kind of have to put that in here. If you're using PyCharm, it's smart enough to not need this, but VS Code needs it for now. So just don't worry about it too much. Just include the dunder in it and you should be fine. And oh my gosh, we are so close. All we gotta do now is configure the tests. So let's open that command palette again. And this time I'm going to search configure tests. And here it is, this first option, Python configure tests. Click on this. It's going to ask you which test framework are you using. We are using PyTest. So select PyTest, and then it's going to ask which directory is going to contain your tests. In our case, we have this test directory, so click on that. Oh my gosh, and things are working because look, it says, hey, no tests were discovered. Is that right? That is correct. We don't have any tests yet. But now we can start writing tests. So before we go on to the next video that's going to be all about that, let's write one example test just to make sure everything is working as expected. So underneath tests, let's make a new file, and I'm going to call this one test underscore example.py. Notice how I started the file with the word test. All of your test files by default will need to start with the word test underscore and then whatever you want to call it after that. So in my case, test underscore example.py. So make sure you include that test underscore. That's very important. Same thing with our tests. Our test names will need to start with test underscore as well. And you'll see that right now. So let's write a test real quick. So from pylenium.driver import pylenium. Then we'll use def test underscore Google. Notice again the test underscore. And we need to pass in the Pylenium fixture. You can think of the Pylenium fixture as like the actual WebDriver itself. We just call it Py. And now we can use Py in our tests. So Py dot, and here's all the things you can do. Now remember at the beginning I said that Pylenium is a very simple wrapper on top of Selenium that has Cypress-like bindings. So if you're familiar with Cypress, a lot of this is going to look very similar. If not, that's totally okay. You'll get to see it right now. So py.visit is going to navigate you to a URL. And we're going to go to google.com. There we go. And then we're going to perform a search. So py.get, we're going to get the search field, which I believe is the name of Q. And within this, we're going to type the word puppies. Yay, puppies. Who doesn't like puppies? So let's type puppies into the search field. And then from there, we need to find the submit button, because with the submit button, we can actually submit our search. And it has the name btnk. And then we'll just submit that. There we go. And once we submit that search for puppies, then we should see a page that contains the title of puppies that we just searched for. Right? That would make sense. Save the file. And do you see what I see? Because I see a run test and debug test above my test now. Me seeing this means that everything is now configured correctly on VS Code. It knows that this is a test with PyTest, and so it's identified it once I save the file. And this is really cool because now I can put things like breakpoints, like I'll put a breakpoint here, let's say, and then I can debug the test and it'll stop here and I can step through and do all the regular debugging stuff I'm used to, or you can just click run test and have it execute the test. And oh, all of a sudden we got this red squiggly. What the heck, Carlos, what happened? Well, the thing is, VS Code is all ready to go, but we haven't actually initialized Selenium to be ready to go as well. So almost got you there, but let's open up our terminal again. And all we need to do here is initialize Selenium. Now, normally you would just say Selenium init, but notice how for me Selenium is red, right? Because we didn't install Selenium to my machine, we installed Selenium to our virtual environment within Poetry. So if I want to run a command within the virtual environment, you start it with Poetry run, and then the command you want to execute. In my case, Poetry run Selenium init. Now, before I run this, I want to open up this Explorer here so you can see what we currently have. Right? We have the Poetry lock, the PyProject.toml, our settings in VS Code and everything. Now let's execute this command. And more things just got created. So you'll see we now have this pytest.ini file, we have a conftest.py file, and a selenium.json. This is everything that Selenium needs to work, to run. If we open up this selenium.json, we'll actually see some of the stuff that is being used. So for example, here's the default configuration that's running Selenium. So we'll have our browser of Chrome by default, but you can change this to be other things like Firefox or whatnot, but we won't do that for now. But now that it's all set up and initialized, let's go back to test example and run the test again. And there you go. This time it passed. So now you can see that VS Code, when it passes, it shows little check marks. And when it fails, it shows a red squiggly with the error message as to why it failed as well. And that's just one small example of how we're going to be doing this throughout the rest of the course. So I hope you're as excited as I am, because we're going to get into some cooler stuff, more tests, refactoring things and whatnot. It's going to get pretty awesome. So for now, VS Code set up, Selenium is set up. You can start writing tests and playing around with it. I'm going to show you a cool resource that you have access to next. Alrighty then, so I want to show you this because I created a whole repo on GitHub that includes all of this code that we're going to be going through. So don't feel like you have to, copy everything from the screen and, oh crap, I didn't see that or forgot that. You actually have the text form of this whole thing. Now, if you look through here, at the bottom of the README, I've included the commits of every change that is made so you can copy and compare your code. Feel free to pause the video and refer to the repo whenever you need to. Like literally, you'll see everything in here. So hopefully this is a huge help for you because I know that having the code that I can work along with the video has always helped me out. So hopefully it helps you as well. All right, everyone, you should now be ready to start writing UI automated tests, which we'll do in the next video. As always, please post any questions in the comments below or at community.lambdatest.com. See you in the next video.